Jake is 18 and church in his Texas town is just a chore until Nathan, a 29-year-old pastor with magnetic charisma, shows up. His words ignite a forbidden fire in Jake, but Nathan is hiding a secret that could destroy them. Will passion conquer faith or destroy everything? The air in Willow Creek, Texas, always carried the faint scent of dust and pine, but inside the small clapboard church on Elm Street, it was different. It smelled of old hymnals, polished wood, and the bitter tang of coffee brewing in the fellowship hall. For Jake Carter, 18 years old and restless, that smell had been a constant his whole life. Church wasn't exactly his passion, he'd rather be out on his bike, tearing through the back roads with the wind in his face, but it was home in a way. His mom dragged him there every Sunday, and he'd grown up stacking chairs, passing out bulletins, and dodging the old ladies who pinched his cheeks and called him such a good boy. It was routine. Predictable. Until that Sunday in April when everything changed. Jake slouched in the back pew, his sneakers scuffing the worn floorboards, half listening to the chatter around him. The congregation was buzzing about the new pastor, someone to replace old Reverend Harper, who'd retired after 40 years of fire and brimstone sermons. Jake didn't care much. One preacher was the same as another, right? He was doodling a motorcycle in the margin of his bulletin when the double doors at the front creaked open, and a hush fell over the room. He looked up, and that's when he saw him. Nathan Hayes stepped into the sanctuary like he'd walked out of a movie, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows. He was 29, Jake would learn later, but he carried himself with a kind of quiet energy that made him seem younger. His eyes, a sharp green that seemed to cut through the dimness, scanned the room as he offered a shy smile. He wore a simple button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a pair of jeans that didn't scream, "preacher," at all. Jake's pencil froze mid-line. Something about the guy hit him like a jolt. Maybe it was the way he moved, confident but not cocky, or the way that smile softened the edges of his chiseled jaw. Nathan climbed the 3 steps to the pulpit, adjusted the mic with a small, nervous laugh, and said, "Good morning, Willow Creek. I'm Nathan Hayes, and I guess I'm your new pastor." His voice was deep, warm, like the hum of a guitar string, and it rolled over the room like a summer breeze. Jake sat up a little straighter, suddenly aware of his own heartbeat. Nathan started his sermon, something about love, freedom, and God's grace, and yeah, Jake had heard that stuff 1,000 times, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just words. It was the way Nathan's eyes lit up when he spoke, the way his hands moved like he was painting the air. Jake couldn't look away. When the service ended, the crowd spilled into the fellowship hall for coffee and gossip. Jake lingered, grabbing a stack of chairs to move like he always did. His palms were sweaty, and he told himself it was just the Texas heat creeping in. That's when he heard it, footsteps behind him, steady and deliberate. "Hey, thanks for sticking around to help," came that voice again, smooth and close. Jake turned, and there was Nathan, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee, steam curling up in the space between them. "You're Jake, right?" Jake blinked, caught off guard. Yeah? How'd you know?" His voice cracked a little, and he cringed internally. Nathan grinned, a flash of white teeth that made Jake's stomach flip. "I've seen you around the last couple Sundays. You're the one who's always here but doesn't say much. Figured I'd put a name to the face." He took a sip of his coffee, those green eyes locked on Jake's, and for a second, it felt like the room shrank to just the two of them. "You don't have to be so quiet, you know. I don't bite." Jake managed a shaky laugh, shoving his hands in his pockets to hide how they trembled. "Yeah, well, not much to say, I guess." It was a lie. He had plenty to say, just not the words to say it. Not with Nathan standing there, close enough that Jake could smell the faint woodsy cologne clinging to him. "Well, I'm glad you're here," Nathan said, his tone softening. "This place could use some fresh energy." He clapped Jake on the shoulder, firm, friendly, and walked off to greet some of the older folks clamoring for his attention. Jake stood there, the spot where Nathan's hand had been burning through his t-shirt, his mind spinning. It was nothing, he told himself. Just a new guy being nice. But as he watched Nathan weave through the crowd, that easy smile lighting up the room, Jake felt something shift inside him, something dangerous, something he couldn't name yet. And for the first time in forever, He didn't want to run out of that church as fast as he could. He wanted to stay. The next few weeks in Willow Creek felt like a slow burn for Jake Carter. The church, once just a Sunday chore, started pulling him in like a magnet. He told himself it was habit, stacking chairs, hauling boxes of hymnals, wiping down the pews, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was Nathan Hayes. Ever since that first sermon, the new pastor had lodged himself in Jake's head like a song he couldn't shake. It wasn't just the guy's looks, though those green eyes and that easy grin didn't help. It was something else. Something in the way Nathan carried himself, like he was holding the weight of the world but still made it look effortless. Jake started showing up more, volunteering for odd jobs he'd never cared about before. He'd catch himself scanning the room for Nathan, heart kicking up a notch when he'd spot him, leaning against the pulpit, scribbling notes, or laughing with the choir ladies. And Nathan noticed. "You're turning into my right-hand man, Jake," he'd say with a teasing smirk, tossing him a rag to dust the altar or a stack of papers to sort. Their hands would brush sometimes, quick, accidental, and Jake would feel a jolt, like static electricity, sharp and unignorable. He'd mutter some excuse and turn away, cheeks burning, praying Nathan didn't see. But Nathan kept seeking him out. After one midweek Bible study, Jake was sweeping the foyer when Nathan appeared, loosening his tie like he was shedding the preacher role for a minute. "You're good at this," he said, nodding at the broom. "Ever think about sticking around more? We could use someone like you." His tone was casual, but his eyes lingered a beat too long, and Jake's throat went dry. Maybe," he managed, gripping the broom tighter. Nathan just smiled, that slow, warm smile, and walked off, leaving Jake staring at the spot where he'd been. It wasn't all in his head, was it? The way Nathan's voice softened when he said his name, the way he'd stand a little too close when they talked, it felt deliberate. But then doubt would creep in. He's a pastor, Jake would think, lying awake at night, staring at the cracked ceiling of his bedroom. He's just friendly. That's his job. Still, the thought of Nathan's hand on his shoulder that first day, the weight of it, kept looping in his mind like a broken record. Then came the moment that cracked things open. It was a humid Wednesday afternoon, the kind where the air stuck to your skin. Jake was in the church basement, hauling folding tables back to storage after a potluck. Nathan was there too, sleeves rolled up, sweat beading on his forehead as he carried a stack of chairs. They worked in silence mostly, just the clatter of metal and the hum of cicadas outside. Jake was reaching for a table when Nathan's phone buzzed on a nearby shelf. It lit up with a name, Clara, and Nathan froze. He dropped the chairs with a clang, snatched the phone, and answered in a hushed, tense voice. "Not now," he muttered, turning away. "I told you I'm busy." Jake pretended not to hear, but his ears strained anyway. Nathan's tone was sharp, nothing like the warm drawl he used with the congregation, or with Jake. "We'll talk later," Nathan snapped, ending the call and shoving the phone in his pocket. When he turned back, his face was tight, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual, though his pulse was racing. "Yeah, fine," Nathan said too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just family stuff." He grabbed another chair, his movements jerky now, and Jake didn't push. But the air felt heavier after that, charged with something unspoken. Who was Clara? A sister? A friend? Something more? Jake's stomach twisted at the thought, and he hated himself for it. He had no right to care. The next Sunday, the whispers started. Jake overheard Mrs. Grayson, the nosiest deacon's wife, muttering to her clique in the fellowship hall. "He's a charmer, that Pastor Nathan, but I hear he's got a past. Some girl up in Oklahoma, they say." Jake's coffee went cold in his hand as he listened, pretending to fiddle with a sugar packet. A girl. A past. It made sense. Nathan was young, good-looking, of course he'd have someone. But the idea gnawed at Jake, sharp and bitter. Later that day, they were alone again, sorting hymnals in the sacristy. Nathan was humming softly, some old gospel tune, when he bumped Jake's elbow reaching for a book. "Sorry," he said with a laugh, but he didn't pull back right away. His arm stayed there, warm against Jake's, and Jake's breath hitched. He glanced up, and Nathan was looking at him, really looking, those green eyes steady and searching. "You're quiet today," Nathan said, voice low. "Something on your mind?" Jake swallowed hard, the weight of that phone call and the gossip pressing against his ribs. "Just tired," he lied, forcing a shrug. Nathan tilted his head, like he didn't quite buy it, but he let it go. "Get some rest then," he said, clapping Jake's back, another touch, another spark. As Nathan walked away, Jake's hands curled into fists. Tired wasn't the word. He was tangled up, caught between wanting to run from whatever this was and wanting to lean into it. And now, with Clara's name echoing in his head and the town's whispers growing louder, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing, something he wasn't sure he could handle. Jake Carter couldn't get that name out of his head, Clara. It clung to him like the sticky heat of a Texas summer, buzzing in his thoughts as he went through the motions at church. The past week had been a blur of stolen glances and half-spoken words with Nathan Hayes, the pastor who'd turned Jake's quiet world upside down. Every brush of their shoulders, every time Nathan's voice dropped low just for him, it pulled Jake deeper into something he couldn't name, something that scared him as much as it thrilled him. But Clara, whoever she was, loomed like a shadow over it all, and the whispers in Willow Creek weren't helping. It was a Thursday evening, the sky bruising purple with dusk, when it happened. Jake had stayed late at the church, tasked with organizing the cluttered office while Nathan prepped for Sunday's sermon. The room was a mess, stacks of papers, old bulletins, a chipped coffee mug someone had forgotten. Nathan was at his desk, scribbling notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Jake kept his head down, sorting files, trying not to stare at the way Nathan's fingers gripped the pen or the way his rolled-up sleeves showed the lean muscle of his forearms. The silence between them was comfortable but electric, like the air before a storm. Then Nathan's phone buzzed again, rattling against the desk. Jake's eyes flicked to it, Clara flashing on the screen. Nathan cursed under his breath, a sharp "Damn it!" that cut through the quiet. He grabbed the phone, stood abruptly, and muttered, "I'll be right back," before slipping out to the hallway. Jake's stomach churned. He shouldn't snoop. He knew that. But the pull was too strong. The second the door clicked shut, he darted to the desk, heart hammering like he'd just run a mile. There, half buried under a stack of sermon drafts, was an envelope, creased, worn, like it had been handled 100 times. The return address read, "Clara Evans, Tulsa, Oklahoma." Jake's fingers trembled as he slid out the letter inside. It was short, handwritten in neat cursive. "Nathan, I know you're still figuring things out, but I need to hear from you. The wedding's in 3 months. I love you. Please don't shut me out, Clara." Wedding. The word hit Jake like a punch to the gut. Nathan was engaged. Engaged. His chest tightened, breath coming fast and shallow. He stuffed the letter back, hands shaking, just as the door creaked open. Nathan stepped in, phone still clutched in his hand, and froze when he saw Jake's face. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice tight with something like panic. Jake couldn't hold it in, the hurt, the confusion, the stupid, reckless hope he'd been clinging to. He grabbed the envelope and thrust it toward Nathan. "Who's Clara?" His voice cracked, louder than he meant it to be. "You've got a fiancé, and you're, what? Messing with me?" Nathan's eyes widened, then dropped to the letter. His shoulders slumped, and for a second, he looked smaller, like the weight of the world had finally caught up to him. "Jake, it's not," he started, but Jake cut him off. "Don't lie to me," he snapped, stepping closer, his fists balled at his sides. "I saw it. Wedding in 3 months. She loves you. What the hell am I supposed to think?" His voice trembled with a mix of anger and something softer, something that stung worse, betrayal. Nathan set the phone down, slow and deliberate, like he was buying time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, raw. "Clara's real. The engagement's real. But it's not what you think." He dragged a hand through his hair, pacing a step before turning back to Jake. "I was supposed to marry her. It's been the plan for years. Her dad's a pastor, my family's tied up in it. It's what everyone expects. But then I came here and—" He trailed off, his green eyes locking onto Jake's, sharp and unguarded. "And I met you." Jake blinked, the words sinking in slow, heavy. "Me?" he said, barely a whisper. His anger faltered, replaced by a dizzying rush of hope and dread. "Yeah, you," Nathan said, stepping closer, close enough that Jake could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "I didn't plan this. I didn't want this. But every time I'm around you, it's like, I can't breathe right. I've been trying to fight it, to stick to the path I'm supposed to be on, but it's killing me." His voice broke, and he looked away, like he was ashamed of the truth spilling out. Jake's head spun. He wanted to yell, to shove Nathan away, to run out of that cramped office and never look back. But he couldn't move. "So what?" he said, voice hoarse. "You're just gonna string her along? String me along? What am I to you?" Nathan flinched, like the question cut deeper than Jake meant it to. "You're not some game," he said fiercely, meeting Jake's gaze again. "You're the first thing in years that feels real. But I don't know how to do this, how to be this." He gestured vaguely between them, his hand dropping like it weighed too much. "I'm scared, Jake. Scared of what it means, what it'll cost." The air hung thick, heavy with everything unsaid. Jake's chest ached, torn between the sting of Clara's letter and the pull of Nathan's confession. He took a step back, needing space, needing to think. "I don't know what to say," he muttered, running a hand over his face. I need time." Nathan nodded, slow and pained. "Take it. I'm not going anywhere. Not yet." He turned back to his desk, shoulders hunched, and Jake slipped out, the letter's words, "I love you," echoing in his skull. He stumbled into the cool night air, the stars blurring overhead, and realized he was shaking. Nathan wasn't just a pastor with a secret. He was a man unraveling, and Jake was tangled up in the mess. Whatever came next, there was no going back. The days after Nathan's confession felt like walking a tightrope for Jake Carter. Willow Creek's quiet streets and the church's familiar walls seemed to close in, every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind carrying the weight of what he now knew. Nathan was engaged, promised to Clara, a woman waiting in Tulsa, but he'd looked Jake in the eye and said, "You're real." Those words burned in Jake's chest, a wildfire he couldn't douse, no matter how hard he tried. He avoided Nathan as best he could, skipping midweek services, keeping his head down when he had to be there. But Nathan's presence was everywhere, his voice echoing from the pulpit, his laugh drifting through the fellowship hall. It was torture. Friday rolled in with a storm brewing on the horizon, dark clouds piling up over the Texas plains. Jake had been roped into helping set up for a youth group event, tables, chairs, a tangle of extension cords for the projector. The air was thick, heavy with the promise of rain, and the church felt emptier than usual, most folks heading home before the weather hit. Jake was in the sanctuary, wrestling with a stubborn cord, when the first rumble of thunder shook the windows. He didn't hear Nathan come in, didn't notice until a shadow fell over him and that voice, low, steady, cut through the quiet. "Need a hand?" Jake's head snapped up, and there was Nathan, soaked from a quick dash through the rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, green eyes catching the dim light. Jake's mouth went dry. "I've got it," he muttered, turning back to the cord, but his hands fumbled, betraying him. Nathan didn't move, just stood there, water dripping onto the floorboards, until Jake couldn't ignore him anymore. "You've been avoiding me," Nathan said, not accusing, just stating a fact. His tone was soft, but there was a crack in it, like he'd been carrying the weight of Jake's silence all week. Jake clenched his jaw, staring at the tangle in his hands. "Yeah, well, maybe I needed to think. You dropped a bomb on me, man." He didn't look up, couldn't risk seeing those eyes and losing his nerve. Nathan stepped closer, boots scuffing the wood. "I know. I shouldn't have. Look, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. But I meant what I said, Jake. Every word." His voice dipped, raw and unguarded, and Jake's resolve wavered. Thunder rolled again, louder, rattling the stained glass. Jake stood, tossing the cord aside, his frustration boiling over. "What do you want from me, Nathan? You've got a fiancé, a whole life planned out, and I'm just, what? Some kid who's supposed to wait around while you figure it out." His voice rose, sharp with hurt, and he hated how it shook. Nathan flinched, but he didn't back off. "You're not just anything," he said, fierce now, closing the gap between them. "You're why I'm questioning everything I thought I wanted. Rain lashed the windows, a sudden downpour that drowned out the world, and the sanctuary felt smaller, the air charged. Jake's breath hitched as Nathan's hand reached out, hovering near his arm, then dropping like he wasn't sure he had the right. And then it happened. Nathan's resolve cracked. Jake saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darkened with something desperate. He stepped forward, grabbed Jake's face with both hands, and kissed him. It was sudden, fierce, tasting of rain and regret, and Jake froze for half a heartbeat before melting into it. His hands found Nathan's shirt, clutching the wet fabric, pulling him closer. The world narrowed to the heat of Nathan's mouth, the thunder crashing outside, the wild beat of Jake's heart. It wasn't soft or tentative, it was a dam breaking, years of restraint spilling out in one reckless moment. Until the door banged open. They sprang apart, breathless, as lightning lit up the room. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Hargrove, the church's stern-faced elder, his umbrella dripping, eyes wide with shock. "What in God's name?" he started, voice booming over the storm, but he didn't finish. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than the rain pounding the roof. Nathan stepped back, hands falling to his sides, his face pale. "Hargrove, I can explain," he said, but it sounded weak, hollow. Jake's stomach dropped, panic clawing up his throat. Hargrove's gaze flicked between them, disgust curling his lip, and without another word, he turned and stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him. Jake's legs felt like jelly. "Shit," he whispered, running a hand through his hair, his lips still tingling from the kiss. "He saw us! He saw us!" Nathan didn't move, staring at the door like it might swallow him whole. "Yeah," he said, voice barely audible. "He did." He turned to Jake, eyes wild with fear and something else, resolve. "I'll handle it." "I'll handle it?" Jake cut in, voice rising again. "He's gonna tell everyone. The whole damn town's gonna know by morning." His chest heaved, the reality crashing down. The whispers, the stares, the judgment, it was all coming, fast and unstoppable. Nathan grabbed his arm, firm but gentle. "I won't let them hurt you," he said, low and fierce. "This is on me. I'll take the fall." But his hand shook, and Jake saw the cracks. Nathan was as scared as he was. The storm raged on, lightning flashing through the windows, and Jake pulled away, needing air, needing space. I can't do this right now," he muttered, bolting for the side exit. He stumbled into the rain, soaked in seconds, the cold biting his skin. Behind him, Nathan called his name, but Jake didn't stop. The kiss, Hargrove's face, Nathan's promise, it all spun in his head, a chaotic mess of want and dread. Whatever happened next, the town would never be the same. And neither would he. The rain didn't let up that night, and neither did the chaos in Jake Carter's head. He'd run from the church, from Nathan, from the weight of Mr. Hargrove's accusing stare, but there was no outrunning what had happened. The kiss, hot, desperate, real, lingered on his lips, a ghost he couldn't shake. By morning, Willow Creek would be ablaze with whispers, and Jake knew it. He'd paced his room, the floorboards creaking under his boots, until the storm finally broke, leaving a damp, uneasy quiet. Sleep never came. All he could see was Nathan's face, scared, defiant, promising to take the fall. But what did that even mean? Saturday dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. Jake avoided his phone, knowing texts from friends or his mom might already be piling up with questions. He stayed home, dodging the world, until a sharp knock rattled the front door. His heart sank. He wasn't ready for this. But when he opened it, there was Nathan, standing on the porch in a faded jacket and jeans, no trace of the pastor's polish. His green eyes were tired, shadowed, but steady. In his hand was a small duffel bag, slung over his shoulder like he was ready to bolt. "Jake," Nathan said, voice rough. "We need to talk." Jake stepped aside, letting him in, his pulse racing. The living room felt too small with Nathan there, the tension between them crackling like static. "Hargrove's already talking," Nathan started, dropping the bag by the couch. "He went straight to the elders last night. Told them everything he saw." He rubbed his jaw, a nervous tic Jake had come to recognize. "They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow." "I'm done, Jake." They'll strip me of the pastorate by Monday. Jake's stomach twisted. Because of me? His voice came out small, guilt clawing at him. No, Nathan said fiercely, stepping closer. Because of me. I crossed the line. I chose this. He gestured between them, his hand trembling slightly. I've been on the phone with Clara all morning. I told her it's over, everything. The engagement, the plans. She's hurt, but she'll be okay. I couldn't keep lying to her. Or to myself. Jake stared, the words sinking in slow and heavy. You broke it off? Just like that? Not just like that, Nathan said, a bitter laugh escaping him. It's been coming for months. I've felt it since I got here, since I met you. I was running from it, pretending I could fit into that life. But after last night... He trailed off, eyes locking onto Jake's, raw and unguarded. I can't go back. I don't want to. The room spun a little, Jake's breath catching. So what now? You're just gonna leave? What about the church? What about... He stopped, the unspoken us hanging in the air. Nathan took a deep breath, like he was steeling himself. I'm resigning. Tonight. I'll tell them it's my choice, that I'm stepping down for personal reasons. They don't need the details, not yet. After that, I'm out. I've got a buddy in Austin who'll let me crash until I figure things out. He paused, then softer. But I'm not leaving you behind, Jake. Not unless you tell me to go. Jake's heart thudded, loud in his ears. He wanted to say something smart, something cool, but all that came out was, You're serious? His voice cracked, and he didn't care. Dead serious, Nathan said, a small, shaky smile breaking through. I love you, Jake. I didn't mean to, didn't want to, but I do. And I'm done hiding it. He stepped closer, close enough that Jake could feel the warmth radiating off him. I don't know what this looks like, us together. But I want to try. If you do. Jake's throat tightened, a rush of fear and hope crashing through him. He thought of the town, the fallout, the way people would talk. He thought of his mom, the church ladies, the life he'd known slipping away. But then he looked at Nathan, really looked, and saw the man who'd unraveled him, who'd chosen him over everything else. And suddenly, none of it mattered as much as this. I do, Jake said, the words spilling out before he could overthink them. I love you too. It felt wild, saying it out loud, like jumping off a cliff with no net. But it was true, had been true for longer than he'd let himself admit. Nathan's smile widened, relief flooding his face. He reached out, tentative at first, then pulled Jake into a hug, tight, fierce, like he'd been holding back for too long. Jake buried his face in Nathan's shoulder, breathing in the faint scent of rain and cologne, feeling the world steady under him. They stood like that, wrapped up in each other, until Nathan pulled back just enough to kiss him, slow this time, soft, a promise instead of a plea. Later that night, they drove out to the edge of town, past the church and the gossip and the weight of it all. Under a sky studded with stars, the pickup truck parked on a dirt road, they sat on the tailgate, shoulders brushing. Nathan's hand found Jake's, fingers lacing together, and they didn't let go. Where do we go from here? Jake asked, voice quiet against the hum of crickets. Anywhere, Nathan said, squeezing his hand. As long as it's together. He leaned his head against Jake's, and for the first time in days, Jake felt light, like the storm had passed, leaving something new in its wake. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jake knew that. The town would buzz for weeks, maybe months, and the shadows of their old lives would linger. But as the stars glittered over the Texas plains, he didn't care. They'd chosen each other, against the odds, and that was enough. For now, it was everything.